Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being so flexible. For those who are just joining us on the live stream, we had to call an audible at the last moment because there are some exciting things going on here in the Capitol with the election of a new Speaker of the House, and Whip Immer has a pretty important role in that. So he actually had to give his remarks just a bit early. I did get a recording of that, and I will add that to a version of this event that'll be post-produced, and hopefully you'll get to see that and enjoy it. His comments were really great. Happy Global Encryption Day, and thank you for joining us in recognizing this occasion. Of course, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Whip Immer. He and his dedicated staff just made all of this possible, really. And I'd like to acknowledge those who have traveled from afar to be with us to speak on our panel. I'm Paul Brigner. I'm head of U.S. Policy and Strategic Advocacy at the Electric Coin Company, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. Today we come together to celebrate Global Encryption Day, a day that underscores the vital role encryption plays in our digital world. Encryption is more than a technical concept. It's the cornerstone of secure digital transactions. At Electric Coin Company, we rely on a unique form of encryption known as zero-knowledge proofs to safeguard the privacy of users of the Zcash cryptocurrency. But the significance of encryption extends beyond our work. It is essential for every organization and individual engaged in the cryptocurrency industry. As a testament to this, we will hear from a remarkable group of C-level executives who bring invaluable insights from the cryptocurrency industry and share their thoughts on the significance of encryption. As I reflected on my decade-long journey of advocating for encryption in preparing for this gathering, I realized that my passion remains today strong as ever. In fact, there is a subtle reference to encryption in the policy platform that I helped develop at Electric Coin Company. It's represented by the asterisk in the PGP. Right up there, you see the asterisk. So, of course, pretty good policy is what we're trying to develop. And for those who may not be familiar, PGP also refers to pretty good privacy encryption. I've used the PGP in doing not only congressional briefings like this, but in breakfast meetings and PGP podcast. It's all about pretty good policy, but the subtle reference again to pretty good privacy. That is a tool that was developed by Phil Zimmermann back in 1991. It became the focal point of the crypto wars, a term describing the efforts by the United States and allied governments to restrict public and foreign access to strong cryptography. A battle that was eventually won through grassroots efforts almost a decade later. The early stages of the crypto wars paved the way for the secure online commerce and communication that we enjoy today. And quite frankly, without it, we would not have the internet that we all experience and love today. Phil Zimmermann documented his experiences in a PGP essay. I've printed a few of those for you to read today, along with some other comments. For those online, you can look at philzimmermann.com to see that. I think it's important to reflect on that when we recognize Global Encryption Day. I'd also like to recommend a book. It's called Crypto, as in cryptography, not cryptocurrency, by Stephen Levy, if you want to learn more about the crypto wars.
Yeah, there's nothing happening in Washington. But before I head to that, I just want to thank all of you for being interested and or involved in the space. Digital assets is where we're going. This is the future, and the future has arrived. We've got a lot of legislators, we've got a lot of elected officials and bureaucrats who are scared to death of this thing. And they're trying to put roadblocks up, and they're trying to equate it with Sam Bankman-Fried. They're trying to equate it with things that, frankly, are as old as finance, right? Centralized, top-down controlled finance. This is a whole new frontier. And I would tell you that I got involved because when I first got here, I had a great staffer who gave me a book, The Age of Cryptocurrency. And you might look at me and go, yeah, I could see that guy is probably like a gamer and he's, doing all. No, sorry guys, I'm not. Technology was not my thing. But I got 7 kids. I mean, their ages now 33 down, or 31 down to 21. It keeps me in the game because I watch how they all evolve and how they all learn differently, all the way down to the last couple that are thinking way outside the box from where I was ever taught. My generation was taught in 2-dimension at best, and some of us would be accused of only 1 dimension, but 2-dimension at best. And we had paper files, and you guys are thinking outside of that. You're up here somewhere. And I read this book, because you give me a book, I'm going to read it. I complain there weren't enough pictures in it. I am in Congress. But it opened my eyes to where we're headed. And it was just the beginning. That was 7 or 8 years ago now. What it showed me and what we've come to is this, and this is why the fight, you just have to carry the fight to the people in Congress. They need to understand we need this technology developed here in the United States of America. If you think about this, it starts out as the internet. In 2008, you've got this terrible financial situation in this country. And there's a white paper out there where somebody named Satoshi has got this idea for Bitcoin. And I think the people in our government apparatus, I think they looked at it, and the central bankers here and all across the world were like, oh, look at the kids. Look at the kids. They've got another game they're playing with something called Bitcoin. That's cute. That's great. A couple years later, they started saying, we better do something about this thing. This seems to be growing. A few years after that, they realized they can't stop it from growing. So now there seems to be a full-blown attempt to absorb it into the existing 2-tier banking system and the government surveillance network. It's not going to work. The beauty of the phase that we're in, the ownership economy, if you will, is that we don't need intermediaries. I don't think you're ever going to get rid of intermediaries because, take me for instance, if I'm selling a piece of real estate, I probably am going to want to hire a third party to make sure that they close that deal for me, and I'm willing to pay something for that to make sure that it's valid. But you know what? If you and I are just going to do business on content that I've created on the internet, I don't need an intermediary. I don't need the man involved in the transaction. So what you really have going on right now is you've got a bunch of legislators that, Sam Bankman-Fried, that was as old as finance, a centralized, corrupt organization that they try to put all digital assets. It's not even close. I mean, think of all the due diligence that was missed on that thing. There's enough blame to go around that isn't just him, but it was crooked. When you talk about people doing business together, this is the future. And the future has arrived, and it's either going to happen in this country or it's going to happen in other places around the world, which, even though I'm probably more of a libertarian when it comes to government regulation and oversight, if that is your argument, why would you want to drive it off our shores? Why would you want them down in the Caribbean committing their fraud? Wouldn't you want them right here in the United States of America? And I'll leave you with this, because this is the other thing that gets me rolling. We've got $33 trillion in debt in this country, and we have no way to pay for it right now. We're not even thinking about how we pay for it. We're bleeding about $1.5 trillion a year. The only hope in my mind that we have is much like the internet when it exploded back in the 90s, because it was allowed to explode. We had something in this country called the boom economy. 25 years of the largest wealth creation in the history of the world. Now, some of us believe that the pie is just this big and we got to divvy up the pie. Others of us believe this is just the beginning. And if we keep this here, if we allow this innovation to grow here, we allow the 21st century economy and opportunity to be here in the United States of America, and we start to make some better decisions on how we pay our bills and what we're putting money into, we can grow this economy to the point where we can pay that off. That's the future for the United States of America. And I would argue to my friends on the Senate side, to some of my House colleagues that are playing this political game with it, you got to stop. We got to figure out how to work with the technology and the entrepreneurs that are creating it so it stays right here. This is where it belongs. This is where we can benefit dramatically from it. And Anyway, I'll stop there. I don't know if you want me to do any questions, but I'm really pleased that you're involved in here today.
If you have a moment for questions, I'm
Sure.
sure this audience would love to ask. So any questions for Whit Bimmer? Is it like who's going to be speaker maybe?
No, I came here to Congress in 2014 after the election, and we had a big organizing convention. It was John Boehner, right? Big hall, about 300 people in it, all talking across each other like it's a lunchroom when you were growing up in grade school or high school. Only about 300 people. And you got the business taking place up in the front. I'm a new member. I'm drinking a cup of coffee in the back because I'm not relevant. I see Kathy McMorris Rogers over the din of the noise endorse John Boehner for Speaker of the House. Then I see this little guy in the back corner opposite me get up and start walking up the side wall, and he's got really bad hair. And I realize about halfway there, it's that Trey Gowdy guy from South Carolina. And I'm thinking, wow, I heard some things when I came here that Trey Gowdy might want a challenge for Speaker. But this is the story. Trey gets up to the mic, people are still talking, he says, "I rise today." And people start quieting a little bit. He goes to nominate John Boehner for Speaker of the House. People start quieting down even more. He says, "Now when I go home to my constituents and they are yelling at me, they are screaming at me, why did you vote for that John Boehner for Speaker of the House?" Dead silence. Everybody's waiting, and then Trey drops the mic with this: "I tell them to punish him. Who would want this job?" Nobody. Good luck to my friend Jim Jordan.
So with that, before we dive into our program, I want to express my gratitude to Stand with Crypto Alliance for their outstanding work in fostering the cryptocurrency community. And please join me in welcoming Nick Carr. He's the chief strategist with Stand with Crypto, and he's going to provide just a few comments.
Thanks, Paul. Stand with Crypto. Stand with Crypto Alliance serves as the primary hub for founders and builders and advocates alike to ensure that the entire crypto grassroots community voices are heard. And so we're happy to help sponsor Global Encryption Day as we shed a light on safeguarding millions of Americans and individuals worldwide to ensure we all remain safe and secure through each of our digital actions each and every day. So thank you again, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Nick. Now we will hear from Dave Grimaldi. He's the Executive Vice President and Head of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association, a group that I very much appreciate for all their work in helping to organize the cryptocurrency industry. And he might give us a little bit of legislative context or insight into things that are important for us to be focusing on today. Please, Dave.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. And I think that it bears mention that Paul has started something kind of special with the variations on the acronym PGP. So for those of you in the room who don't know it, it's pretty good privacy. It's turned into pretty good pancakes. It's turned into pretty good pours. Last night was the happy hour. What am I missing? What's another? Pizza. Pretty good pizza. It makes you want to, like, if he broadened out new business lines, like pretty good playthings, like a new toy company, Toys Are Hot, pretty good plywood, we could go into lumber together. But Paul is, I think, and I said this to a couple people outside, he's one of the hardest working guys in DC with what he's done. He's provided this gathering ground for us once a month for a lot of people in this room to just come together and share what we're all doing from a blockchain and crypto and digital asset perspective. And he's kind of turned us, and a number of us in this room, into a band of brothers and sisters. And for those of us who have been in DC for a little bit, you can envision decades ago what the pharmaceutical advocacy and lobbying industry looked like. Was it a room this size with this many people, and now it's thousands, if not tens of thousands, of advocates and lobbyists and regulatory councils, et cetera? Or think of the manufacturing industry. If they had a similar event and filled this room, you wouldn't be able to get half the people in here. We are this I think, tremendous hardworking community of believers. And at Blockchain Association, we take that very, very sincerely and very seriously. What will we turn? Emmer said it a moment ago. Are we the future of global finance? We think we are. Are we the future of finance and technology? We think we are. And to be in it at the ground floor in the BA offices is something that just really feels good. And we have had a heck of a couple of years. You all know that. But Paul, again, brings us together with podcasts and so forth. Blockchain Association is 5 years old and started by Kristen Smith 5 years ago. We're now over 110 member companies, and we're here really trying to bring that speaking truth to power to members of Congress and the federal government. And as Emmer was saying, there was, up until very recently, there was a knee-jerk reaction from, and I'm saying this as a former Democratic staffer, from Democrats in Congress to ignore this industry, because every time they mentioned something about crypto or blockchain, they quote unquote legitimized it. And I heard this from staffers themselves. We don't want to hold a hearing on your industry because it lends credibility and legitimacy. And you know, that hurt, that stung, as we're all working as hard as we are on these issues. But then we started to talk about the online economy turning into the sharing economy, turning into the ownership economy, and what it's like to have a piece of real estate online through an NFT, through assets, through whatever it is. And if we're fast forwarding now, there are 2 subcommittees with the words digital assets in their titles. Like, oh, what a difference a year makes. There are multiple pieces of thoughtful legislation working their way through the House and Senate. Of course, on the other side of that, there are a number of pieces of damaging legislation as well, and that's what we do every day at BA, is we try to educate and walk members of Congress through what they're doing and the effects that it'll have. And we're trying to get that message to members of Congress on relevant committees or just members of Congress generally. The ones on our relevant committees, they sleep it and breathe it a little bit more. But off committee, these are still intimidating issues, and members of Congress grab onto the piece of it that they relate to. Wait a minute, I thought you guys were finance. Wait, I thought you were technology. Wait, you're something in the middle? I don't understand. I don't have to focus on this today. Get this out of my way. And our role is to, again, lend that realness to it. And Congressman Richie Torres from the Bronx, one of our chief advocates, tells that real story, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room have heard it. He came from a home with a single mom. I think both of his brothers were in trouble with the law, and Congressman Torres was 13, gay African-American member in New York City, future member of Congress in New York City, and he couldn't get a bank account. He didn't have a fixed address. Wherever he went, he couldn't do it, and he is a dogged, tenacious, smart guy, and he found a way to invest his assets and keep them safe, this new thing called crypto. Now, out of 435 members of the House, that's one who has that story. To my knowledge, there's no one else that has that story. But he is one of those that is kind of spreading that around and saying, this is life-changing, right? This is something that is very personal to him. Let me tell you about that story. And we amplify all of those stories. Crypto is a lifeline that crosses borders, brings families closer together. Remittances offer a cheaper and faster way for immigrants to send money. That resonates with many of the sub-caucuses here. It's impactful for people without access to banking and tens of millions who can't rely on stable and local national institutions. Congressman Torres, chief among them. We are now, through a couple of different associations overseas and entities, launching Crypto Aid Israel. That's not a BA endeavor, but that is a crypto and digital asset-focused movement that, as with Ukraine, is trying to get money to those who need it, using fast, quick payment mechanisms. So all that to say, we have this dynamic and innovative story to tell. We're trying to prevent unintended consequences in different pieces of legislation. That's hard to do because, as many know, once a member of Congress gets something in their head, it's hard to convince them otherwise, and they move toward it. But we're having that dialogue with members of the federal government, and we're doing it with the partners in this room. A lot of great Blockchain Association member companies. And I'm, as with my colleagues, Ron Hammond and Matt Alvaro, I think I can speak for them, we're proud to work on these issues. And we're proud to work in this industry, in this family, if I can be so bold. And it's a privilege to be here today with all of you. Paul, thank you very much.
That really meant a lot to me, Dave. I mean, I really do feel like I'm family with the BA team. Almost everything I do is with them, and I rely on them so much. It's such good and important work, so I really appreciate that. With that, please, our panel, if you would mind coming up, and let's get that started. We can't wait to hear from you. All of the short bios were on the website for these speakers. There's no way I could even begin to do justice to introduce them. So I'm honestly not going to try. I'm going to let maybe Eric, as a moderator, you can do a little bit of that. But at least I will say something about the moderator, my friend Eric Berger. He's been friends with Eric for a very long time now, worked with him at Georgetown University for a few years, and even before that at the Internet Society, again, working on encryption issues. He has been working on this so long, it's pretty remarkable. Over 25 years of experience overall, but he's worked in industry, in government, in academia right now at Virginia Tech University. And I just know he's going to pull out some really good insights from this panel. So I'm going to leave it to you, Eric, to take it from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And as Paul said, we've worked a long time together. And this is not a new topic. You might think, crypto and all that's a new topic. But what we're going to be talking about today kind of transcends crypto. I will do the very briefest of introductions. Again, I'm not into the one-page long intros because I fall asleep saying it. All the way on stage left, your right, Marta Belcher. She's president and chair of Filecoin Foundation. And she is also the official real lawyer on the panel with training and practice. Next to her is Zooko Wilcox, who's the CEO of the Electric Coin Company. And has been around digital cash, again, for longer than most people in this room. The only other person I know is Shinichiro Mitsuo, who's got his 1998 digital cash card from Japan. And you're predating that, so it's been around. Philip Martin, Chief Security Officer of Coinbase, also experienced at Palantir and the California National Guard, because I know things that people kind of get concerned about, like, well, can't this be used for other stuff? And he's got some counterintelligence background there to help inform us. And finally, Henry Holtzman, CTO of MobileCoin, former Chief Knowledge Officer at the MIT Media Lab. You got there right after I left. Good time. No, that was great. So with that, we were going to go very informal format, and definitely looking forward to questions coming from the audience as well. So I was going to start with you, Marta, if you don't mind. Since you are the lawyer and have been involved with civil liberties and privacy, why is encryption important to the future of crypto?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's so interesting when you have conversations about encryption, this idea that somehow because we're doing something online, that third parties should somehow have a right to see what we're doing is really kind of shocking to me. When we talk to our family and friends in real life, right, when you're having a conversation one-on-one or in a group, you would never expect for it to be normal for other people to record that conversation and have access to it and be able to view it, use that information for their own purposes, turn it over to third parties and governments. You would never expect that in the real world. For some reason, there's sort of this normalization with the digital world, where because it happens that we live our lives through just a handful of companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, right? It is somewhat normalized, the idea that these companies have access to your communications, to your data, that they can use that information and that you have no choice but to trust them with your data, to trust them to protect your civil liberties, to trust them not to misuse it, to push back on unfair requests for it. And I think that it's really important that we move this normalization towards a world where online, we expect to have the same kind of protections that we would have in our one-on-one conversations in our daily lives. And what end-to-end encryption does is it really moves that protection into the online world and lets you have conversations with people and interactions with people, just the two of you, or just in that group, without third parties watching.
Yes, actually, that's great. Marta, talking about like the importance to the web. Zuko, how is encryption important for privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies? Things like Zcash.
Thanks. Well, I'm still agog at what Marta said. That was so eloquent, and it makes me think of the conservative pitch for encryption, which is that encryption is what protects and preserves the way we've always done things, because all of our lives are digitalizing, and if we don't take steps to add digital protections with the digitalization, then we get this vulnerability, like Marta said, to megacorporations, also to scammers and hackers and foreign enemies and so on. And we also, at the same time, risk making it possible, like never before, to have totalitarian surveillance and control of every single person at every single moment, which has never been possible for even the most sort of unprincipled and brutal totalitarian of the past. That was never in their power until now. And encryption is the thing that sort of keeps civilization like we grew up in it. Like Marta says, you can have a conversation and everyone expects that that's just between you. And governments can be limited in their capabilities because that's what's worked so far. Let's keep it going. So your question, though, was about cryptocurrency specifically. This is something I really like, is the fact that Global Encryption Day is a celebration of more than cryptocurrency, but encryption per se. And something I really like, so your question was, why is encryption necessary for cryptocurrencies? I think it is. There's this, within the world, I have this really interesting experience. Within the world, okay, I'm going to finish. Within the world of cryptocurrencies, there's this assumption of global transparency where everyone can see everything all the time, just because kind of an historical accident that's how Bitcoin started it, because Satoshi tried but couldn't do better at the time. But outside the world of cryptocurrencies, the assumption of everyone being able to say everything is just crazy. Like, that's completely unacceptable to normal people. So that's why encryption is necessary for cryptocurrencies, to make it acceptable to real usage by the rest of the world.
In fact, let me skip over Philip for just a second. We'll promise to get you. But Henry, yeah, you're like, oh, I'm up. So, we talked a bit about people's privacy. We've talked a bit about, just started the conversation on cryptocurrencies. What about like business models, proprietary technologies? What's the role of encryption in safeguarding kind of that part of the equation?
Oh, well, yeah, the examples there. Is it on? Heat the microphone. Okay. Two numerous examples to go over. So let me think about maybe some transformative changes. I'm been in computers long enough to remember when, if you had multiple office locations for your company, you had to like rent private telephone lines in order to have secure communications between them. That's all given way now to just being able to use the internet because of things like SSL and TLS, where every application can have a secure connection to the back end that's servicing it. And that transforms not just how a company can operate internally, have higher security and lower costs, but also who it can do business with remotely. So like, we couldn't have online banking, for example. We'd all still have to be going into the bank and dealing with either the ATM or the teller if it wasn't for being able to have an end-to-end encrypted connection from every device back to every company. And so that's been tremendously transformative, not only technologically, but in terms of those business models. Some other examples of business models that have been enabled by encryption, streaming music, for example. So like every music stream is encrypted to make sure that people are supporting the artists with the royalties. Well, so now for $10 a month, I have access to the entire collection of music, rather than having to buy each individual piece of music that I want to hear. Tremendous transformation of an industry thanks to encryption.
And now, Philip, as promised, because we've seen people, currency, business models. Given your day job, how does encryption how is that important for protecting a company's stuff? Protecting a company's business, its operational security, its business security.
I think the answer follows, right, from the previous answer. For Coinbase, this is obviously incredibly important, right? We're protecting tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in cryptocurrencies and have done so for quite a while. But it goes beyond cryptocurrency and into protection of everyone here's private information, right? From loss or theft. It goes into enabling communications between disparate businesses. Every single credit card transaction every single one of us makes is enabled because of secure point-to-point encryption between those processors, between those devices that you touch, and the sort of central processing facilities. Even something as simple as the ability to file your taxes online, right, is enabled through the use of encryption that allows for the protection of that data, right, both in transit and at rest. And so from there are examples abound, right? We could talk about the criticality of protecting trade secrets and the use of encryption there for the knowledge economy, right? Pieces of pure information that by themselves, right, create value, and would create value whether they're here or they've been spirited somewhere else. So I think it's absolutely fundamental to the ability as an organization to exist in an ever more online world.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'll take a pause for a minute. Anyone out there have any questions? Otherwise, I'll keep going. And actually, Paul, do we have a roving microphone? We do. One moment, please. We have...
Hi, thanks, and great to see all of you again. Fantastic, Eric. I had a question, since we've got this incredible diversity of representation across privacy coins, people that have played a role for years related to cryptography, regulatory approaches related to some of those technologies, as well as financial applications. Some of the projected future of Web3 is to provide this infrastructure that can enable at the same time financial transactions as well as data transactions. And our expectations for privacy look different depending on the use case surrounding certain financial information and use cases, healthcare, data storage and use otherwise. I'm just curious if you have thoughts about the policy or technology approaches or solutions that can help to approach where we need different types of discoverability and disclosability based on the use case, when now we have the same rails that can support information transfer and financial transfer, and with the right obfuscation, you can't tell which is occurring. So would love the thoughts from the security experts.
Please. Nope.
Sure. I doubt I'll be able to address the entirety of that question, but I think one piece that you said actually resonated with me, which is the expectations piece. I think that's actually the most important part of that question, is figuring out what are our expectations in this online world. Should they be the traditional expectations that we all had in terms of individual privacy? My personal answer is yes, right? But I think that's actually a broader question that we need as a society to decide what our view is. And then from a technical standpoint, look, my view here is we have all the tools we largely need between the basics of traditional cryptography, things like multi-party computation that enable processing of data in confidential ways, things like zero-knowledge proofs that look for my money. We don't even yet know how impactful they are going to be because they're too new, right? From my view, I think the question is going to be how do we arrange these building blocks? But we can build, in my opinion, almost anything we want to build at this point.
Can I jump in? Yeah, I agree with the expectations being potentially the most important part. And also that reminds me of something Marta said. And also that reminds me of what I've been hearing from some of my younger friends recently, which is really disturbing. It's privacy nihilism. It's an assumption, well, yes, Mark Zuckerberg knows everything about you. Your phone is listening to you all day long and recording whatever you talk about to use to advertise to you, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. That's just like, we all have to get used to it. And it's not, I don't know if that's an expectation or acceptance. What I hear it said kind of like miserably, that's kind of like, we now live in a dystopian world, but there's nothing anyone can do about it. And that's the part I disagree with. I think we can totally do things about that.
Yeah, I think as I read about this topic in the media, there tends to be a lot of black and white thinking, as though it's either we get complete privacy at the detriment to society, or we get no privacy at the detriment to the individual. But of course, it doesn't have to be that way. We can, as has been said, depending on the use case, the application, we can pick any point in between. One of the things about Web3 is that it is the joining together of a lot of diverse, decentralized technologies. And so some use cases may be better on some subset of those technologies where they are really focused on privacy. That my communications with my family, for example, should be completely private between me and my family. And there are messengers that offer end-to-end encryption to ensure that. But there are other points in the spectrum too. We know Bitcoin is completely transparent. And perhaps there are great use cases where we should continue to use Bitcoin for things because that transparency is desirable. I think what we have to keep in mind is that we do want, even when we are building solutions for privacy, that there are ways to be compliant with the regulations and the laws, and that we should engage with policymakers and lawmakers, figure out what that is, and craft solutions that try and thread that needle of providing the privacy that people need, but also providing the disclosure to regulatory regimes that those regimes might require.
That's great. And it is an area of, as you know, Carol, of current research. We've been working on some DARPA work and DoD, NSF work, because encryption is necessary, but not necessarily sufficient for privacy. Just the fact that we're communicating is information. How big these encrypted packets are, how often they go back and forth, can offer a wealth of information. And yes, from a policy perspective, this is federal money paying us to figure out how to make that private, because there are many use cases where it's in, and because you said, without the privacy protection, it hurts the individual. It even can hurt society. And that's recognized by many policymakers. And so how to make society stronger. Actually, as we're talking about that, because, again, I think people might have this vision of, but we're talking about encryption and personal communications, but we're also kind of talking about money. But Marta, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what's going on at Filecoin and kind of what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talked a little bit earlier about the way that we currently live our lives through just a handful of corporations. And when it comes to the web, today's web, it's extremely centralized. So any website you go to is the actual data is being stored on a server that's owned by one of just 3 companies, which is Microsoft, or Google, or Amazon Web Services. And the problem with that is that we really have no choice but to trust these companies with our data. These are also central points of failure, which means sometimes one of these companies will have an outage and vast swaths of the web go down for hours, which is the problem with single points of failure. And so what we're doing is using cryptocurrency to build a better version of the web where users are in control of their own data, and a web that can really protect user security and privacy, where you don't have to live your life giving all of your data to just a few companies, and where you don't have to trust them. The way we're doing that, we're using the fact that with cryptocurrency, it allows you to program your money, right? You can write computer programs that say things like, for every second of a song I play, automatically transfer 1/1,000,000th of a cent to the songwriter, instantly and automatically across the world. That programmability we're using to create a decentralized file storage network. You can think of it sort of like Airbnb for file storage. So people who have extra storage space on their computer hardware rent it out to others, and they get paid in Filecoin for doing so. And that sounds a little bit niche, but what it allows you to do is create a new version of the web, where instead of people having to go through just a few companies with their data, they actually have a web where they are in control of where their data is stored, who has access to it, and what they can do with it. So we think that's very powerful, and very in line with the issues that we're talking about today.
Yeah, although if I can push a little further, what's that got to do with encryption?
Well, what it has to do with encryption is that it gives you the ability to actually choose what happens to your data, including encrypting it, right? If I want to if I have to live my life through the centralized web, where really there are just a few players, where I'm handing over my data to these companies and I have no choice but to trust them, that is a totally different world than a world in which the user has control over where they're storing their data, whether that data is encrypted, who can decrypt it, and I think really creates not just one alternative, but sort of the base layer on which many, many applications can build on top of this technology to create an entirely new version of the web where users can control who sees their data rather than hand it over to a few corporations.
Philip, there have been talk about making, from a policy perspective, kind of breakable encryption. What would you think about that? Is that okay? Do we actually need strong encryption from kind of, again, a business perspective?
Yeah, it's never worked. Very, very straightforwardly, it's never worked. The reason it's never worked is because whenever anyone's tried to make a breakable encryption, you normally involve either some sort of keyed trapdoor where someone special has some piece of information they can use to reduce the difficulty of the decryption, or maybe it's some sort of escrow service, right? Cleverchip was sort of famous for it, right? And both of those things fail for different reasons. The escrow service fails for the very simple reason that you, as the escrow service, have just made yourself the most valuable target in the entire world. And my experience, right, having been in the cybersecurity field for a long, long time, is that when you make yourself that large of a target, someone's going to take some shots at you, right? And if they take enough shots on goal, they're eventually going to get something, right? On the first hand, when we think about some sort of backdoor keyed system, those keys tend to be durable. So you have one little little secret that you need to keep secret, but you also need to share that secret thing with other people so they can make use of the secret decryption backdoor. And that becomes very, very difficult to do safely and securely over long periods of time. The problem there is, let's say, if we're talking about my web browsing activity for the last week, it probably doesn't need to stay secret for very long. If we're talking about long-term planning documents or very sensitive research and development intellectual property that's been created, if I can capture that on day one and decrypt it on day 700, 800, day 5,000, that might still have quite a bit of value, right? And so what bad actors will do in that case is what they're starting to do right now with the rise of quantum is say, we don't know when this is going to show up. It's going to show up one day. Let's just start capturing everything we can in the knowledge we're going to be able to break it later and thus derive economic value from it, right? So the set of incentives, incentives it creates for attackers and defenders, I think, are just not tenable.
Thanks. So Henry, how is MobileCoin kind of integrating these strong encryption technologies to enhance privacy and security for its users? And what do you think companies ought to do? Can they all be? Should they all be like MobileCoin?
Let me just back up a little bit and explain MobileCoin to put it in context. So MobileCoin is a layer 1 blockchain, along with a wallet application for using it. We call it Mobi, and also we power Signal Payments. And we crafted MobileCoin to be targeted to payments. Like, that is the domain, that is the use case that we wanted to address, because we didn't feel that there was quite the right technology out there for it yet. And what's important to payments in our minds are, number one, that it's inclusive. Okay, so we wanted people to have self-custody of their funds, and we wanted them to have a decentralized ledger that anybody could take advantage of. So that's like the inclusivity piece. Number two, we wanted it to be nearly instant so that it could be used both for face-to-face transactions as well as transactions across the globe. And that means to us right now, we try to keep everything under 10 seconds. You can imagine if you're like at the cash register in the store and you can pay in under 10 seconds, you're not holding up the line. But if it's going to take a minute, you're kind of holding up the line. If it's going to take 10 minutes, everybody's going to be angry behind you. All right. We wanted it to be extremely inexpensive to transact, because we wanted to enable, like those scenarios Marta was just talking about, where you're doing micropayments, where the cost of transacting doesn't limit the use case and the business models around how those transactions can work. Like, I like to think of it as, instead of subscribing to one online news source and then kind of living in its bubble, right? I can buy art. It would be great if I could just buy the articles I want to read and like pay 25 cents or $1 or whatever for each and not have that swamped by the cost of that transaction. So MobileCoin costs well under a penny for every transaction. And then we get into, the issues of your question, which is that, our expectation is that for the most part, our payments are not public. Like, if I am seeing a therapist, like the fact that I'm seeing a therapist and which therapist and what their specialty is should not be revealed because I'm paying that therapist. Like, that's private information for me. My employer paying me and how much they pay me, that's between me, my employer, and the IRS here in the US, but not for everybody to know. So we wanted end-to-end encryption in the system. And we wanted it to also work on mobile devices, so you could use it everywhere. All right, that was actually a kind of complicated intersection to do the engineering for. I'm very proud of the engineering we did there. But there's another piece, and that other piece is, as we were talking earlier, it's like the compliance piece, it's the regulatory piece, it's the, how do we comply with all of the laws and regulations of the various countries. And so we also built in things to our protocol to help with that. Where, for example, right at the very bottom of it, we have a separate view key and a spend key. So if you want to reveal your view key to an authority, you could for auditing purposes without giving over the ability to spend your money. And in fact, we have a different view key for every transaction. So if you need to show an authority just some transactions, you could just show them the view keys for those transactions. But that would be up to you. That would be up to maybe a court subpoenaing that. Like, there are all kinds of tools already at our disposal to compel people to share this information. We don't have to put it out completely publicly. Then also, there is the idea that when you're interacting with these entities that are regulated, exchanges, banks, people like that, we've also built a layer around that rather than backdooring the crypto, as we were just talking about, because that would just make the whole blockchain valueless. We build on top, where we build tools into the application to let you release the records easily that are needed for those regulated entities to perform their regulatory obligations. So yeah, I think that looking at it that way is the kind of thing that other companies should do as well. We should engage as an industry. We should engage into conversations with law enforcement, with regulators, with lawmakers, and figure out, like, how do we support both? How do we make a secure system, a system where, for example, a law enforcement officer could pay a confidential source without risking their life? You know, it's kind of like they want transparency on the one hand in order to analyze data and find criminals or prove in court criminal activity, but then they also need that same privacy in order to do the investigative side. So, you know, striking that balance. And that's something that we want to engage in, and we want to invite everybody else to engage in that as well.
Oh, great. And in fact, yes, I was remiss. So Zooko, tell us about Zcash. And as well, you know, comment on what you've heard so far.
What I've heard so far is all very interesting. Zcash is a cryptocurrency. I'm one of the founders of it, but it's a very decentralized thing, so I'm not really the controller or official spokesperson for Zcash, but one thing I'm really proud of in having gotten it started is that it's the first implementation of this new technology called zero-knowledge proofs. And ever since we implemented zero-knowledge proofs, they've gone on to become one of the most promising technologies, not just within cryptocurrency, but potentially for all kinds of other things. Like Philip mentioned before, they're the latest addition to our toolbox. We only have 3 or 4 of the really important tools like encryption and digital signatures, and it looks like zero-knowledge proofs may be in that set of really important tools for all kinds of humanity's infrastructure going forward. So I'm really proud of that. And more generally, it's a neat thing about the cryptocurrency industry is that it's empowered, or it's fueled up a lot of innovation because there's money attached. There's tokens and business models proliferating in all directions, and that's enabled investment into creating new technologies, which were not being really deployed by Facebook and Microsoft and Google, who were pretty satisfied with what they already had. So that's a sort of a positive benefit on society that we haven't really seen play out yet, because these new tools, like Philip said, it's going to take like 5 or 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years zero-knowledge proofs are built into every operating system and every device and every network protocol that all of humanity relies on. But anyway, aside from creating cool new technologies that might benefit the rest of the world, Zcash is also a decentralized, open cryptocurrency which solved Satoshi Nakamoto's original puzzle. I mentioned that cryptocurrency is sort of transparent by default, and Satoshi and the other early Bitcoiners, I was involved in the whole Bitcoin project. I'm the author of the first blog post ever written about Bitcoin, and Satoshi chatted with me about it and linked to my homepage on the original Bitcoin homepage and stuff like that. But during that era, Satoshi and some of the other early Bitcoiners had this conversation. They were like, well, we've got this design. We can now transfer value over the internet the way we are able to transfer information over the internet. That's great. But there's this massive privacy problem with it. If only we could figure out how to use zero-knowledge proofs, we could solve that. But then they weren't able to because it was like 5 years too early for the technology. And so that's what Zcash came in and did, was add that piece. So Zcash is just like Bitcoin with encryption, like blockchain and encryption are these two really powerful technologies, and you couldn't put them together until you had the third piece, which was zero-knowledge proofs to glue them together. So that's the Zcash.
Great, thanks. And I will endorse it's for more than just cryptocurrency. And of course, we'll thank our sponsors. So thank you to the NSF. We're working on using zero-knowledge proofs and multi-party computation for spectrum sharing, for communication networks that want to see what's available without divulging who is asking for the spectrum, because that's proprietary, secret stuff. And yet everyone needs to know that someone wants it. And it gets really interesting because there are rules about, if you've got so much stuff, you want something right next to it if you can, but you don't want to divulge that you already got some stuff. But yet you need to know that you got some stuff. So it's, some very interesting things that, literally 5 years ago, we would have, it wouldn't have been we would not have gotten funding because people would say, you just can't do that. And now we still not sure we can do it, but we think we can. So that's still going on. I'll open it up again. Please, Paul. Yeah, there you go.
So, Henry, looking at you primarily on this one, I think it's easy in rooms like this to be a little bit blinded by privilege because we don't have to worry about state compliance being a threat in this room, right? In this country, however, in many communities we do. Right? So women seeking access to health care, the queer community seeking access to health care, and there's areas in the world where this can cost people their lives, right? When it comes to that view key, is there a way to disable or real-time destroy those view keys for those times where compliance threatens safety?
So the view key is private. And yeah, you could throw away your view keys. You could, take your 24 words, and you could make sure they're backed up, and you could then erase them from your phone so that you can get access again later. The view key will be needed when you want to get access to those records again.
If I wanted to say, reply to a subpoena in full compliance and not be crossing yet another line, that's where I was curious if the destruction of those is an effective way to protect communities from the state.
Yeah, I mean, basically you're describing, throwing away the data. Is there a way to throw away the data? And the answer is absolutely, right? And it's the kind of thing like, back to the ways encryption has been changing our technology. We now have the ability to whole drive encrypt all of our laptops, right? We can tell them we want the hard drive encrypted. And as soon as we throw away the key to that encryption, that hard drive is now unrecoverable. And it's exactly like that. If you throw away your key, it's unrecoverable.
Although, as Zuko pointed out today, actually, I'll toss that out. Tossed a fastball, which is many of these schemes rely on asymmetric encryption. What happens when asymmetric encryption is read like a piece of paper?
Well, there's a lot of encryption algorithms that already exist that are resistant to possible future quantum computers. Out of the encryption algorithms that we use today, Some of them are already resistant to possible future quantum computers. Others are definitely vulnerable to possible future quantum computers. But we're working on new improved algorithms to replace those ones so that it'd be possible to have a complete system in which none of the pieces could be broken by potential future quantum computers. I even contributed to one of those algorithms. I'm very proud of it. In particular, it's a neat thing about Zcash, the way we designed it, is that it's already impenetrable to future quantum computers under certain conditions. It depends on if you reveal your Zcash address to the attackers who are gathering it up, like Philip was describing, to decrypt it later. But you can use Zcash all day long, and you don't reveal your address to the attackers. You just reveal your address, like person to person, to the other people you're interacting with. If those future attackers never got a copy of your address, then they cannot decrypt your Zcash transactions, even when they invent quantum computers. I think that's pretty cool.
Maybe just a little bit here. So this is frequently talked about in absolute terms, right? Is like one day it's going to go from asymmetric encryption is unbreakable to asymmetric encryption is read like paper, and that's actually not the case. There's a ton of nuance in what systems will be attackable with what preconditions on what timeline. This is an incredibly nuanced thing. I think the salient points for people here are, to the extent that we have information that we think needs to remain confidential for, let's call it, over 50 years to be conservative, we should be thinking today about how that information is protected, where it's transmitted, who else could or has seen it, and ensure that as we move forward, to the extent that information has to move in some way that makes it visible, do it in a way that looks forward with quantum computing in mind. Maybe this is multiple layers. Cloudflare is doing some experimentation here. We see it in SSL doing traditional encryption, a layer of, say, lattice-based encryption, going down the pipe. The other thing I would say about this is I don't have a crystal ball, but I highly doubt we're going to wake up one morning and a quantum computer capable of running, say, Shor algorithm or any one of the other invented algorithms is going to pop into existence, right? I think this is going to be a development of increments over time, and chances are we will all have quite a bit of time to adjust to this new reality as it starts to come on the stage, which is great because that gives us time to actually develop and build trust in different cryptography algorithms that are likely to resist the what today are probably even currently unknown quantum algorithms to break those systems, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't think this is going to show up tomorrow morning. It probably won't even show up in my professional career, I'm going to guess. But to the extent we have information that needs to remain confidential over decades of time span, we should be thinking about how we're protecting it today.
And we do have a question out there. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming today, and this has been a really great conversation. This question's mostly for Marta, but for all of you, as the resident attorney, I'd be curious to hear kind of what your thoughts are, the intersection of open source technology and encryption. We've talked about PGP has been invoked, but PGP was physically transferred on floppy disks. And then now we have this thing called GitHub where, you can transfer information, you can transfer code. I know the Treasury Department is very interested in this and has recently indicted some people for developing open source technologies and doing some other things too. But would be curious about kind of the intersection of those two things and, how do we balance the need for national security, the need for, and then, on the other hand, the need for personal privacy?
Yeah. So, I think your question is getting to something pretty fundamental, which many folks on the panel have mentioned and I think have thought a lot about, which is the idea that there is a spectrum between, privacy and individual privacy and civil liberties and security. And I don't actually think that spectrum that a lot of people think is a spectrum is a spectrum. I actually think that when it comes to things like encryption, that technology is absolutely critical for national security, right? And I think so. I think that spectrum idea, or the idea that this is a trade-off, is not exactly right. And then when it comes to the question of how you think about individual privacy versus information that is going to be made available publicly, actually, that's something that we, at least in the US, have an answer to, which is that there's this idea that if I did have something following me around and recording everything that I do, right, all the time, and, handing that over to the government, we would catch all of the criminals, right, and 100% of the time. And what it comes down to with the Fourth Amendment is this idea that, okay, we're not going to have that. We're going to have a default that is private, right? Under the Fourth Amendment, the default is privacy. And if you want to overcome that default of privacy, you can do that. What you need to do is you need to go to a court and have probable cause for suspicion and get a warrant, and then you can get information about that individual. And so there actually is an answer of how do we balance those two things, and that is the answer that under the Constitution we've come up with. And I'm sure others on the panel have a lot to say on this topic, because this is one of the fundamental, values questions that I think a lot of us have thought about.
I agree with what Marta said. The Fourth Amendment's a great solution.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll pile on that, and then something else I think I heard in your question. One is certain other countries have taken laws that were passed here, and when those countries passed those laws, we freaked out. And on the one hand, when you look at those laws, you go, well, wait a minute, it's almost word for word the same as what our laws are. Except the distinction is we have a mostly working rule of law with a mostly independent judiciary. In these other countries, the judiciary reports directly to basically the party, and the party that's in power. And so, this is something we should not take lightly, the importance of our legal system, and that, yeah, we have issues, but again, it's nothing like other places in the world, and that's where we can rely on courts. When it comes to running algorithms in the cloud, we can rely on the company saying, we promise not to look, or we can rely on mathematics. Frankly, I prefer to rely on mathematics than especially a large corporation saying, we promise not to look. Another thing I heard, though, also was about open source. And I'll toss stuff out, and again, welcome others to jump in. I was horrified in a call that I was on just before coming here for this session here. I was on with a regulator talking about protecting critical infrastructure, and this was physical security, not cybersecurity. And a comment that one of the regulators made as we made a presentation was, well, if we fortified the buildings that you want to protect, then the adversaries will know what buildings to attack. And that was one that had, most of us going, really? Yeah, and in the encryption space, that's security by obscurity. We're going to protect this building that if you knock it out, a lot of bad things happen and literally millions of people die. Well, we'll protect those people by not protecting the building. So with open source, yes, back in Phil Zimmerman days, we had security by obscurity. The nation's national security relied upon people not knowing what the algorithms were. And so we have this open source movement, and that was Phil. I'm going to print it on a T-shirt. I'm going to print a book. And so a lot of people, and I would offer kind of conflate open source with open inspection, because the U.S. government, it is now the official position of the U.S. government that, like, all the candidates for post-quantum encryption algorithms are open for public inspection, and please tear them apart. Now, the keys, that has a different kind of level of security, but please look at it. But a thing that gets conflated is because I can look at the algorithm and tear it apart and whatever, does not mean it's open and free and available to anybody to use without whatever. It's not quite the same as the intellectual property regime around it. So I can publish stuff, but say, I got a patent on it, you can't use it. I've done this with some of my IETF protocols. I publish it, I got a patent on it, and the reason I got a patent is to protect you in case someone sues you for using this protocol. So I was just wondering if, although actually, so the real lawyer here will say I won't dare talk about that, and the non-lawyers won't go there, or no, please, if anyone has any thoughts on like open source and inspection and things like that.
I don't know if this is related to the question, but I think of open source as just like another part of science. It's like how humanity remembers and shares and learns from each other is by publishing and sharing.
I agree with that. And I mean, look, also, this stuff is incredibly complicated. This is the kind of stuff that people spend an entire career in, have a PhD in, and still make mistakes. Every single day of the week, right? And so the only way to do this is to do it in public with lots of eyes, lots of participation. I think that gives you the best chance of actually getting a secure, safe, reasonable product. I also wanted to add, I actually have one of the PGP t-shirts that I recently dug out of the closet.
See, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to you that I think one of the more powerful things about the Web3 community is that it is, for the most part, open source. Because in order to have a decentralized system, people need to be able to examine it for bugs, reassure themselves about what it's actually doing, and then also be able to run it for themselves. And so, like, I feel like open source is very core to the Web3 ethos, and it makes it all the more powerful.
I think everything everyone has said is exactly right, which is for something this important, for these technologies that are absolutely critical for so many people's safety and security. When it comes to the code, you need lots of eyes on it to make sure that you're getting it right. And I think everyone has really reflected that well. And I think all of us probably spend all of our work days working on open source code up on this stage. So it's a really critical piece of what we're doing.
Yeah, we got a question down here.
So my question goes directly to the code. What we've seen in the recent years, the conflation of money with speech. And now what I'm curious about, we were talking about, public inspection of code. I mean, the relationship between that, code for encryption, and speech, and what freedoms, how does freedom of speech play into that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's a really important precedent, legal precedent in the US, is the idea that when people are writing computer code, that is First Amendment protected speech. And as with other speech, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, with the code, right? But it does mean that writing the code itself, the act of engaging in writing code, is not itself something that is protected by the First Amendment and all the protections that come with that. And I think that's something that's really important for the space, and also just in general for the ability to develop and work on technology. I think what we've seen in recent months is there's definitely been some back and forth around where you draw the lines on that and how. But I do think that when you're, for example, when you have a criminal investigation and you are looking into prosecuting people, I think there's all sorts of things you can prosecute people for if they really did bad things that aren't literally writing code. And so I think that's a really important distinction for First Amendment kind of jurisprudence.
So, Paul, I know we're kind of at time, but I'm wondering if we can go just a little bit longer.
I would say if we have any last questions, we should take them. But yeah, we could also wrap up. So any more questions?
Got one over here.
Thanks, guys. Wonderful panel so far. My question has to do with blockchain in general is permissionless and globally accessible, and now we're adding on a privacy layer. And it seems like we have confidence in this room that we can make it work within the United States, come up with compliance frameworks, but how do we answer the problem of global state actors outside of the United States using these permissionless networks that also protect individual privacy rights and liberties? So from a national security perspective, how do we find that balance? How do we answer that question?
I don't know. It reminds me of the internet, right? When the internet was new and was getting developed as a technology, there were a lot of these similar conversations at the time. But one of them is, could enemy nation states use and benefit from the internet, and could we prevent them or control their internet and so forth? As far as the internet goes, I guess the answer is no. Right? As far as I know, enemy nation states use the internet as much as they want because they have their own internet.
I don't know either, just putting that out there up front. But I think that this is not, in the context of crypto, this is not the first time we faced this question. Disruptive technologies, how do we control their use outside of communities of trust? And the answer writ large is that, first of all, we as a society have to decide what our trade-off is between risk and reward, right? I think that is, that's a key element to how we've answered this question from an individual privacy standpoint. It's a key to how we balance Fourth Amendment versus things like search warrants and other things. So the first answer is, this is not a technical question. This is a societal risk question, right? That once we answer, I am positive that there are technical solutions to that we either already have or can come to make that a reality. I think the second thing here is that people sometimes think about crypto as this sort of private place where value transfers can occur. And while it can be in the context of something like a Zcash or a mobile coin or others, I think that is, first of all, that is not the case in the vast majority of crypto, right? Bitcoin, for example, is a terrible place to launder money for most people. And I think that even in the context of things like mobile coin, Zcash, there are built-in things like view keys, right, that allow for the legal, on a country-by-country basis, the legal process to have a hook into what is viewable or isn't viewable. And this is obviously complicated, multifaceted, as we talked about, with ability to, to destroy such information if the consequences of destruction are lower than the consequences of production, right? And so I think experimenting with that, are view keys the right thing? Is default public transactions the right thing? Is there some other thing that's the right thing? And really understanding how that plays out within the constructs of our societal risk tolerance for this is actually sort of the key path forward.
Well, that was a great last question. Because, Paul, one last thing. And the one last thing is we're in DC. We clearly have advocates and experts and all that. We also have staffers and people who are doing policy. One last thing, what would you want the policymaker to go home with after this panel today? And yeah, you're nodding your head, so you can go first, Marta.
Well, the problem is Zuko's up second. And the thing that I'm going to say is the thing that Zuko says all the time. So I hope you will forgive me. But the thing that I would love for people to take away, which is 100% from Zuko, is that privacy is normal.
That's a good one. What I would want policymakers to take away is humility. As entrepreneurs, you learn that you don't know what's going to happen. You have some ideas, you might sometimes be right, but there's always a bunch of stuff you didn't know. Same for policymakers.
And that's pretty close to what I wanted to say. Instead, I will say that this industry is incredibly young. It is new. It is still developing and growing at an incredible pace. And when we think about creating policy around it, I think we have to think about this both in terms of setting policy to encourage that development in the right directions, as well as setting policy to ensure that our national objectives are met.
I just want to add on the previous question, I also don't know. And that has to do with what I would say to policymakers, which is lawmakers, policymakers, regulators. You have a really tough job. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes. We want to help you. We want to figure it out. We are innovators, and innovation is the economic engine. And it is important to our country to stay innovative, and this is a space where the innovation is needed. So let's work together.
Well, thank you all very much. Can we give a round of applause to the panel, please?
And thank you, Eric. That was just a fabulous job of moderating that panel. I think we all learned a lot. I did. And I feel like we have appropriately recognized Global Encryption Day, which was the goal here, and recognized it in the context of cryptocurrency, which is, I think, very special to all of us. So thank you all. I so much appreciate you being here, and I look forward to celebrating again with you next year. It's November 21st is the day, but we might observe it early, depending upon when that day falls. So please plan on it, and tune into the PGP for Crypto podcast. Come to a PGP breakfast. I'd love to engage with you all, and thank you for being a part of this day.